We are the Cat's Whiskers, and this is my top line. Yes, a very warm welcome to the latest edition of My Top Line by the Cat's Whiskers. My name is Aaron Lord. Now, you might be wondering, who is this man and why is he presenting My Top Line this time? That is because I'm delighted to say that joining me to discuss and talk about his top line is none other than Jono Bullard. Hello, Jono. How are we?
I'm very good, thanks, Aaron. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. Are you excited about choosing your top line?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Having hosted all the ones so far and listening to some great stories, it's great to be able to add mine to the mix.
Now, as you say, you've presented quite a few of these now, some Panthers and obviously some other teams as well. Has that made your decisions any tougher? Has anybody thrown maybe one name in there that you thought, oh, that's a good shout? Or have you been pretty solid on your choices?
No, I've been pretty solid. I think I had probably two definites when we first started talking about this, me and Paul. Then the others, as I thought about it, they slotted into the different positions quite easily. It was tough. The forwards especially was very tough. The last defenseman was very tough. But I got there in the end, and I'm very happy with the choices I've made.
Okie dokie. Now, before we get on to your team, just give everybody a bit of a background into your hockey sort of life so far.
Wow, I started going in 1980. I went to my first game as an 8-year-old. I was taken by my great aunt and great uncle, my auntie Margaret and my uncle Bill, part of my wider family. They had lots of family members going. They had a row of reserved seats at the old Nottingham Ice Stadium. And whenever someone couldn't make it, I used to take that spot. So for the first probably 10 years, up until 1990, I probably went to 2-3 games a season maximum. Loved it though, but I was mainly a Forest fan back then. Used to go and watch Forest a lot. It was really only from about 1990 onwards that I started going to watch the Panthers on a more regular basis, and then in 1994 I got a season ticket and started seeing them every week. But my first game back as an 8-year-old, I remember it was an 8-5 loss to the Streatham Redskins, so a few older fans will certainly remember them, and I loved it from the first time I went. And then obviously as I started going more regular in the 90s, it became a very big part of my life.
Before we get on to your netminder of choice, lots of ups and downs through those years. Any times that you've thought about walking away from the sport?
Lots of times, but something keeps you coming back. There was quite a few times where you just think it was tough. It was very tough at times, especially those sort of early years at the NIC where we didn't seem to be getting a lot of success, but you persevered with it, and the whole idea of being a sports fan is you follow a team through thick and thin. And we got our thick from sort of 2007 onwards. And there are times that I loved, and I'm so glad I was around and part of it. To see so much success coming to the Panthers through them years was very, very special.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you about your top line, so let's get it started with your netminder of choice.
My netminder is Craig Kowalski.
Craig Kowalski, 5 seasons as a Panther. He joined in 2010-11 after a season in Italy. He played 275 games for the Panthers, winning 1 league championship, 3 playoff championships, 4 Challenge Cup championships, 1 conference championship, and he was, of course, the netminder in the Grand Slam team. So, Jono, why killer?
The thing about Craig Kowalski is just how incredibly consistent he was. He never had a season where I think it was below 91% save average in the 5 seasons he was with us. He wasn't flashy. He was just incredibly consistent, incredibly solid. He got the nickname K-Wall. He was like a brick wall. With Craig Kowalski, you always had a chance to win. You always had a chance to win trophies, and because of him, you was always competing for trophies. He was that good a netminder, the best I'd seen in Nottingham since Trevor Robbins.
I mean, that is a comparison, or those two names are the names that kind of come up when talking about netminders in Nottingham. You've been lucky enough to see both netminders play. Similarities or different, or was it a tough decision?
It was tough, but they were very different netminders. Trevor Robbins had a more aggressive style. He was a very different netminder. He would come out of his crease a lot. He would come to the top of his crease, close down the angles. But the thing with Trevor Robbins is he was the first real import quality netminder that we'd seen in Nottingham. He came for the first season of the Ice Hockey Super League, and he gave netminding in Nottingham a completely different dimension, as many other netminders did around the country, as other teams went with import netminders. We'd always gone with British netminders before, so he brought a completely different dimension to the role. He was very special in that sense. However, the thing with Craig Kowalski is you step forward years later, we're in the Elite League now, but his consistency was just what set him apart from other netminders that we'd had since Trevor Robbins. He's the easiest one to compare to Trevor Robbins in the fact that they both had success with the club. But Craig Kowalski won more championships and was a more calmer netminder, I think. They were very, very different style of netminders. But for me, Kowalski nudged it just because of his consistency and the amount of silverware that he won with the club.
I mean, you talk about silverware there, 9 trophies and obviously that elusive league championship. Did you feel I know you've talked about it, but for you personally, did you feel that he always gave the Panthers a chance to win a game?
Yeah, absolutely. He was always confident with him in the nets. And yeah, he had a few bad nights, as every single netminder does. And let's not forget, his first season, his first couple of months, he wasn't a very popular netminder. The fans took a while to warm to him, but once they did, once he showed what he could do, there was no better person between the pipes.
I mean, just finally, you talk about those first few months, and I think you're very true in what people were saying. We were watching games and you thought, season in Italy as well, maybe not the best league to come from, even though he did have AHL and ECHL experience, but he proved everybody sort of, maybe not wrong, because there was doubters, but to stay for 5 years and to win those trophies just kind of shows the person that he was, but also the netminder as well.
Yeah, and I think he was very comfortable in Nottingham. He liked the lifestyle here. I know he had an apartment that was very, very close to the rink. And he said to a friend of mine that you couldn't sort of put a price on the fact that he could get up in the morning and walk to work. It was comfortable for him. And I think because of that and because of the lifestyle he had, he was very comfortable here. He's very settled. And I think that played a massive part into why he was so successful in Nottingham.
Very true. He says he's enjoyed himself in Nottingham whilst playing for us, and I think on the few occasions that he's come back to Nottingham, he's enjoyed himself maybe a little bit more as well. So Craig Kowalski is Jono's netminder in his top line. So let's move on to your first defenseman. My first defenseman is Roy Mitchell. Roy Mitchell, the Canadian defenseman who was with the Panthers for one season in 1998-99 season. Vastly AHL experience with 333 games, and he joined after a season with the Newcastle Cobras. Played 55 games, 6 goals, 9 assists for 15 points and 46 penalty minutes. He also was a B&H Cup champion. So why Roy Mitchell? Roy Mitchell was very much a stay-at-home defenseman, but he was the first stay-at-home defenseman that I'd really noticed in my time of watching the Panthers. And we'd had some good blue liners, but generally the ones that caught my eye were the ones who attacked. So the likes of Darren Durdle, for example, who played a couple of spells for us. Mitchell was the first one that came in who was actually did his job as a defenseman, and it was
thanks to him, I think, that grew my love of stay-at-home defensemen. I like defensemen who can actually defend and control the blue line, and Mitchell did that brilliantly. He was an incredibly smooth skater, great distributor of the puck, and he was just so calm and effortless when he was on the play. And he was part of an excellent team that season and an excellent defence, a defence that had the likes of Mike Bishop, for example, Corey Bolio in it. So big names in there. But he, for me, stood out of what was an excellent defensive lineup.
For him to only have been with the Panthers for one season, he must have made a big impression on you.
Huge. And he was a player that we often talked about when I used to go with my mates back then. And after a game, and we'd be talking, and he was like, who impressed? And his name would always come up because he was just so good on the defensive line. He protected Trevor Robbins in the net. He was so good at picking up the puck, and he always seemed to have that extra couple of seconds just to look and see what he was going to do with it. He was never rushed. He never panicked. He never seemed to make a bad play. He was one of these players who just knew exactly what he was going to do, and he always seemed to have the time to do it, and that's what really set him apart.
We're talking about the British Super League era here. Player Roy Mitchell, do you think he stood out amongst other imports from other teams as well? Was he that good in your eyes?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the thing, what you got to remember in the Super League, it was pretty much 95% import lineup. So very few British players, which was a shame. But by the by, that was the way that the league was back then. And he, for me, that season was one of, if not the D-man of the season, because he stacked up so well to other defensemen of that era. Also, I think what helped him is the fact that he'd had that season in Newcastle, so he knew exactly what the league was about. So that was an advantage coming in, especially from, as we've seen with many imports over the years, they don't know what to expect from the British League, and it can often take them a while to settle down and start showing their best. I think because Roy Mitchell had that season in the Super League already, I think he hit the ground running and we saw how good he was. But an example of how good he was he was slashed behind the play by Tommy Plummer, who played for Sheffield Steelers then. But rather than just dropping his gloves and going for him, he actually made the play, made sure that the whistle went, and then went after him. So he actually made sure that he wasn't going to damage the team by totally losing concentration on what was happening on the ice to go after a player. He was going to wait until the whistle went, then he was going to deal with it. And I think that was a measure of the sort of player that he was.
To me, that kind of signals a hockey brain.
Yeah, and I think that sums it up perfectly. I think that's exactly how he was. He had a great hockey brain, and he used it to full effect every time he took to the ice.
Okie dokie. So Roy Mitchell is your first defenseman and joins Craig Kowalski on your top line. We will leave the players there for a second, and we will now come on to your favourite game. So obviously, Jono, over the years you have seen many games, as you've already alluded to, maybe some good games and some bad games. But what would you say is your favourite ever game?
My favourite ever game up until this one was actually a Panthers loss. A 9-8 loss in Sheffield in 1995. But
optional.
Yeah, my actual favourite game was on the 23rd of the 2nd, 2016. Ice Sheffield. It was the Sheffield Steelers 0, the Nottingham Panthers 8.
Yes, and this was obviously the Challenge Cup semi-final first leg. Obviously, we've talked about recording this, and we've gone through, what you're going to talk about tonight. But 8-0, when you look back at that game and when you was choosing this game, what was it about this game that just made you go, that has to be my favourite?
There was a lot that went off beforehand. So the Sheffield were complaining because I think they felt they should have had the second leg, or there was a problem with ice time, which meant it had to be played at Ice Sheffield. So he wasn't happy about that because obviously that reduced their income. Dave Sims was going on about karma and all that sort of thing, and how it would be karma if Panthers lost and Sheffield won. Well, we shoved karma back in its face that night. And also the fact that they made it as difficult as possible for Panthers fans to get tickets, yet still around 250, 300 of us managed to get tickets for that night, of which I was one. And I think that made it special as well, because there was no webcast that night. So only the people who was there actually witnessed it. And of course it was Sheffield, so it was reduced capacity anyway. And it was just incredible. I don't think any Panthers fan who turned up that night would ever in a million years have expected what happened.
No, and I think you can probably add the fans into that as well. I mean, I remember kind of following the game on Twitter, and it was just kind of update after update, goal after goal. I mean, if you look back at the highlights from that game, was it Panthers being very good, or was it Sheffield being pretty poor, or would you say a bit of both?
Bit of both, I think. Sheffield were dreadful. I think it's fair to say they were terrible that night. But Panthers were extremely clinical in front of goal. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Twitter updates, because I was actually doing Panthers Hockey Live that night as well, because I was the only one who was there able to do it. So
did you ever look up?
There were some times where I was down on the phone looking up, and then something else happened, looking down again. I was doing a lot of typing that night. I also remember when I wrote the final score, I put Sheffield Steelers 0, Nottingham Panthers 8, and then put the word 8 in brackets, just like the old grandstand video printer, because I think it had to be emphasised. This was something incredible, an 8-0 victory at the home of our biggest rivals. Okay, it wasn't their normal home, but it was still somewhere where they played regularly. And after all the cup losses, humiliations and what have you that we've had over the years to the Sheffield Steelers, it was just nice to give one back and really rub their faces in it. And I think that's what made it so special. And it was just coming home from that game in just a sense of disbelief at what I'd just witnessed.
Yeah, I mean, like if we talk about the goals from the games, very different scorers. It wasn't like just one player from the Panthers sort of stood out. There was fights. They replaced their netty at 5-0 down. I mean, it was a game that just pretty much probably had everything, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a great entertainment. Obviously very pleasurable from my point of view. I'm sure Sheffield fans who were there will say very differently, and I'm sure I would have said very differently if I'd have witnessed Panthers losing to Sheffield 8-0. It's pretty hurtful when you witness that sort of thing. So from their point of view, it must have been pretty horrible. From our point of view, it was pretty wonderful. But you're right, there was a lot of good goals, and goals in bunches it seemed to be. I remember we went 5-0 up, Marek Pinch got lifted, Brad Day came in, I think the first shot on him went in. That was the sort of momentum we had. There was 48 minutes on the clock when we went 8-0 up. So, of course, all the Panthers fans are chanting, we want 10, we want 10. But I think Panthers had just thought, right, we've got this in the bag. The second leg was the following night in Nottingham. They didn't need to expand any more energy, so they just shut up shop and played the game out. It was just an incredible performance. And
we obviously went on to win the cup that year, so it was maybe the start of, would you say, confidence or belief, or do you think that played a part in maybe us actually going on to win the cup?
Possibly so, because you go to your biggest rivals and score a victory like that, it does give you some belief. That also shut out Sheffield the following night in the second leg, albeit only a 2-0 scoreline, but a 10-0 aggregate win in a semi-final over your biggest rivals is huge. Then, of course, another shutout in the final, winning 1-0 against Cardiff. It was a huge competition, and then that probably gave us the impetus to go on and win the playoffs as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, just finally sort of, we'll talk about this game, is both sides, they were strong sides. I mean, when you look at the Sheffield, they had MacLeod, they had Ben O'Connor, they had some big names in that team. And obviously for ourselves, like you've mentioned, we did a cup double, but it was two good, strong teams going against each other. And like you say, to come out with a 10-0 aggregate win, you don't see that very often.
That Sheffield side went on to win the Elite League title that season as well. So, yeah, they were a very, very good side. But over that series, they were completely and utterly humbled.
Indeed. Right, well, we will now move on back to your players. So we need to fill the defensive line. So who is your second defenseman?
My second defenseman is Guillaume Lepine.
Guillaume Lepine, 2 stints with the Panthers over 5 seasons. His first one in 2010-11 to 2012-13, and then he came back in 2018-2019, and then has just had his second season with us. A total of 303 games played, 19 goals, 66 assists, a total for 85 points, and 835 penalty minutes. 1 league championship, 3 playoff championships, and 3 Challenge Cup championships. And obviously he was part of the Grand Slam team. So why Mr. Lepine, Jono?
Well, I went on with Roy Mitchell about my love of stay-at-home defensemen. And Guillaume Lepine had it all. He could play, he could defend, he could hit, he could fight. And he just grew as a player. I don't know if people remember, but he had actually originally signed for Hull before he came to us. But Hull went out of business and then were rescued by Coventry. But obviously all their contracts that they'd signed became null and void. So Lepine was then a free agent and Corey Nielsen picked him up. And there was a bit of noise when we signed him. It's like, well, why are we signing Hull's cast-offs? And he proved what a good player he was, and it was a masterstroke by Corey Nielsen to bring him in. And also Nielsen deserves a lot of credit because Lepine grew as a player massively in the 3 seasons that he was with us in his first spell, which allowed him to go on and get an ECHL and AHL contract. And I don't know if people remember, but he didn't start the Grand Slam season with us because he was actually in North America trying to get an AHL contract, couldn't find one. A space opened up in the Panthers roster when Nielsen himself got injured, and Lepine came back, and I think that was a big factor in his winning what we did that season.
You've kind of alluded to it there about, Nielsen deserves a lot of credit for developing maybe, but would you class Lepine when he joined us as maybe a little bit of a rough diamond?
Oh, without a doubt. But you could see the quality he had, the hits that he put in on players. And, okay, some of them was classed by the Elite League as illegal. I think there's one on Rob Globkey of the Sheffield Steelers where he knocked him into next week. I still say that was a fair check. I think most people watching it thought it was a fair check. The league disagreed. He got chucked out of the game by the officials. He got a ban for it. And then very shortly afterwards got another ban for hitting Jason Silverthorne as he stepped out of the penalty box. But this guy could hit like a train. And I'll always remember Rick Strachan on the Elite League show on Sky saying, League says bad hit, Rick says great hit, keep your head up, son. And that sort of epitomised Lepine. He could hit, he could fight if he needed to, and he had many fights. But the main thing was he could defend. And I remember in the 2012 playoff final against Cardiff, it was in the final minutes. And I remember Paul Thompson making a point about it on commentary. He just said, look at Lepine, what a fantastic play. And he just stopped a Cardiff attack with something like 40 seconds to go on the boards and cleared the puck. He was taking care of his defensive end first. He was a great defensive player.
You talk about a playoff final with Cardiff, and I think one of my memories of Lepine is that hit that he did on the blue line, and he got, I can't remember whether he got
he got a 10-minute misconduct for it.
Yeah, because checking to the head, I think it was, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it was brutal, and in my eyes, it was a perfectly good hit. You just mentioned about keep your head up, son, and it's obviously one of the first rules that you get taught in ice hockey. But do you think he has changed, or how would you describe the first Lepine that we saw back in 2010 to Lepine that we've just watched in this previous season?
You know, I thought Lapine had a great season this season. I thought he was back to the Lapine we knew. I think most people will admit he wasn't the Lapine we knew his first season back with us. But I think this season, 2019-20, I thought he was excellent once again and was a huge asset on the blue line.
His first season, you know, he was captain. He's obviously doing his studies over these 2 years that he's been. They always say never go back, do they? So, don't they? So do you think those three things maybe just affected his first season with us again?
Possibly. Only Guillaume Lapine can answer that. The captaincy was taken off him this season, and he just seemed to step it up again. He was far better this season, and we saw the Guillaume Lapine that we had in that successful era when he was first at the club.
Okay, so Lapine completes your blue line with Roy Mitchell and Lapine. I have to say, and just before we do move on, you've talked about stay-at-home defensemen. 100 points between your defensemen. How much, just to emphasise, your stay-at-home defensemen?
Yeah, but how many games have they played between them?
358.
So you're looking at around 0.3 points a game. I think that's pretty stay-at-home.
And hey, that is their role, I imagine. Well, it is, isn't it? Okay, let's move on now to a different question for you. A player from another team that you wish had played for the Panthers.
That is Rocket Ron Shudra.
Rocket Ron Shudra, the Sheffield Steelers defensive legend. Now, people that know you, Jono, know that you're not fond of the team up north, but what was it about this Steelers legend that, you know, just made you have to pick Rocket Ronnie?
I think it said it all on the day his shirt was retired by Sheffield. It was on the 20th of March 2010. There was 8,000 plus in attendance at Sheffield Arena. It was a game against the Panthers, and to a person, every single Panthers fan stood and applauded as his shirt was lifted. And that showed the amount of respect that the man had. Even though he played a vast proportion of his career for our bitter rivals, he was an absolute class act on the blue line. An incredibly classy player, scored clutch goals at important times. I mentioned earlier that game that finished 9-8 in 1995. And Panthers were top of the league, and Steelers went 6-1 up. Panthers brought it back to lead 7-6. It was then 7-7. Panthers led 8-7. Then it was 8-8, and Steelers scored with 30 seconds to go. The man who scored the winning goal was Ron Shudra, and that was the sort of player he was. He came up with massively important goals, but he was a great defenseman. Very few penalty minutes considering the era that he played in. And he was just a player that I used to watch and think, I really wish that he had played for Nottingham at some point in his career. I just respected him and rated him that highly.
Like you say, class. I think you don't necessarily have had to have seen Ron Shudra play ice hockey to know, A, the impact that he had in Sheffield, but also the impact that he has within British ice hockey. I mean, he's been inducted for the British Ice Hockey Hall of Fame. As you mentioned, his number 26 shirt is retired by Sheffield. You've talked about the two players that you've chosen on your defensive line. Was he that type of defenseman that you just love when watching defensive players? Actually,
no. He was quite different to the two I picked in the fact that he could be quite attacking. He was also very good on the blue line. But the main thing about Shudra, he was a leader. He was captain of the Steelers for many years, and he led them. Very similar to the way that Jonathan Phillips leads them now, to be fair. He was that mould of cap. And that's another thing that stood out, is how big a leader he was for a team that was incredibly successful in the era that he played for them in two different spells. So I suppose there was a bit of jealousy that he played for them and you wished that he played for us. He just had it all. He just seemed to have everything. He could score, he could pass, he could defend, and he was a quality player with it. This was one of the easiest sections of the whole of this for me to choose. He was straight in there. There was really no other consideration for an opposition player. It was always going to be Ron Shudra.
And I think that speaks volumes. I mean, you've said you would have loved to have seen Ron Shudra wear a Panthers jersey, but you do have a little story about the name Shudra, don't you?
I do. His son Tate, his youngest son, played for Nottingham Juniors in 2018-19 at under 15 level, and they got to the national finals. In the semi-final, Tate Shudra scored. And I was commentating for that game, so I did actually get to call a Shudra goal for Nottingham. So it was quite nice to be able to say, Shudra scores for Nottingham. The only time I've ever got to do it. but it was sort of a nice little consolation prize.
There you go. Let's move back to your top line, and we now move on to the forwards. Now, you've talked about how your forwards were tough choices, etc. But who is your first forward?
My first forward is Simon Hunt.
Simon Hunt spent 11 seasons as a Panther from 1989 to 1999, the year 2000. A total of 425 games played, 206 goals, 132 assists for a total of 338 points and just a measly 1,116 penalty minutes as well. He won the BHL Playoff Championship, the BHL Autumn Cup Championship, and he won 2 B&H Cup Championships as well. Why did Simon Hunt become your first forward?
I hope I explain this well.
Okay.
Simon Hunt is similar height to me, similar build to me, same school year as me, comes from Nottingham. Simon Hunt was my first hockey hero because for me, he encapsulated everything I wanted to be. He had a very similar background to myself, was very similar to myself, and there he was on the ice playing for the Panthers every week. He was everything that I wanted to be, and he was sort of living my dream, if that's the right way of putting it, because there he was, playing on the line one season with Rick Brabant and Paul Lady, scoring hundreds of points, scoring 6 goals in a Benson Hedges Cup semi-final against Murrayfield in a game at the Nottingham Ice Stadium. He was just brilliant. He had an incredible slap shot from up the left wing. Like you say, he was trusted to play on a line with Paul Lady and Rick Brabant in a season that we got so close to winning the league championship. And he could fight as well. He took no prisoners. He certainly wasn't bullied. He'd fight players a lot bigger than him and often come out on top as well. He didn't take any nonsense, and he was just such a great player to watch. And for me, at that time when I used to go to the rink, like I say, he was my first real hockey hero because he had everything that I wanted.
When we're young and we're following a sports team, we always have somebody that we always kind of like look up to or associate with. I mean, how important for you do you think, looking back on it, being that young lad, getting involved in ice hockey, watching this sport that was fast and cold and in a rink, how important do you think it was that you found this one player and this British player that you could just connect with and go, this is a reason why I want to come back and watch this sport?
I don't know. It was just the way he approached the game. He had no fear. It didn't matter who he was playing on the line with. And like you say, he had this booming slap shot that more often than not found the target. There was other players in that team who were similar. You had the likes of Ashley Tate back then, starting out when he was playing for Nottingham. You had Matt Trickett and Mark Twaite, who were also Nottingham lads. I think it was because Hunty was the same age as me, so I think that was a factor. And he was a very similar build and similar height to me, so I could very much relate to him in that way. And I think that's probably why he stood out more than any others.
We were lucky enough when we were recording Cats Whiskers TV many years ago to actually film at the Lions game one time, and he was playing. And yes, you know, it's for the Lions, but he still had it back then, didn't he, really?
He did. I remember when we went to film that, and I remember getting into the rink and the game started, and a bit through the game we was not filming, and I looked up and saw him doing his trademark steam down the left wing over the blue line, looked up and whacked a massive slap shot, which I think hit the bar. And it was just like going back years to the old Nottingham Ice Stadium and exactly the same thing that he used to do. I suppose you never ever lose it.
Very true, very true. Okay, so Simon Hunt becomes Jono's first forward. Let's move away from your team for a second and talk about your favourite goal.
My favourite goal was scored on the 10th of March 2013. It was by David Alexander Beauregard to make it 2-0 in Hull.
Yes, so as Jono says, the Hull Stingrays were the opponents and the Panthers went on to win 3-1. But why that goal, Jono?
That was the goal when I knew that Panthers were going to win the league that season. It was that moment when that goal went in, I went, yes, we are going to win the league. And the reason being that a minute before that goal was scored, we just found out that Belfast had lost 3-2 in Edinburgh, and they were, of course, our big rivals for the title. That meant we needed 4 points to win the title, which would have been 2 points the night in Hull, and then another 2 points from the 4 games that remained. It was just almost as if everything aligned. We found out that Belfast had lost, and then as the cheers were dying down from everybody celebrating that fact, Beauregard gets the puck at the top of the crease, pops it into the roof of the net. Absolute bedlam. And that was it. It was just me. Yes, the stars have aligned. We are going to win the league now. That is it. It was a standard Beauregard goal compared to other goals he scored. He's probably scored better goals, and I'm thinking of the goal in the 2012 playoff final. But the importance of that goal, that was the one that made me think, yeah, we're going to be league champions.
I remember being at this game, and like you say, it was kind of just bedlam, because obviously whenever you go 2-0 up in a game, it adds a bit of cushion to it and it makes you feel a lot better than being at 1-0. But for you personally, obviously you've been a fan for many years, for you to just have that moment where you go, yes, we are going to win the league, that must have been a special moment.
Oh, incredibly. You've wanted all my Panthers support in life to win a league title. It had never happened in my lifetime. And that was the sort of confirmation. That was the thing, was like, yes, you are going to get to witness this. At some point in the next couple of weekends, you are going to see your club clinch the league title. And it was incredibly special. And then, of course, later on in the game, we went 3-0 up. And then Hull, of course, stopped the shutout with 4 seconds to go. And, of course, their scoreboard read 1956.
And for anybody that might not really understand the significance of that, just explain that.
Well, of course, Panthers had not won the league since 1956. So I think for that to happen in that game, that was almost as if the hockey gods were giving it one final nod and then just to go, right, that's it now, it's yours.
I mean, they just doffed the cap, didn't they, really, and go, there you go. I mean, just a few things, but DAB in that season, I mean, he didn't play that many games, to be honest. So to have that importance, which turned out to be the game-winning goal, does that signal the manner of the man? Or, I mean, how would you maybe describe that?
I think he only played 5 league games when he came back, and he still got 5 points. And that was his only goal. But, of course, you've got to remember, this is a man who scored the game-winning goals in 2 consecutive playoff finals for us.
Yeah.
He scored massively important goals for us. If anyone was going to do that, it would be him. And yes, he probably didn't have the crack of the whip that many perhaps thought that he should have done. But when you look at that team, it was very difficult. Who would you drop for him to play? And that was the whole thing. I mean, he didn't even play in the playoff final. And this is a guy who the previous 2 seasons had scored the game-winning goal for us. Yeah. But he couldn't even make the team in the playoff final. And that says a lot. But he was a very, very special player for us. And that was a very, very special goal.
To coin a phrase from some of the people involved in hockey, clutch is a word that I would use for DAB. And
without a doubt.
I think that moment just signals and just tells you everything you really need to know about the man that was DAB. And it was certainly a great goal. And obviously, as you talk about the news that we had of Belfast losing, Belfast were our next opponents, and sort of the rest is history regarding that goal. But for you, obviously, a very, very special goal. So we will come now to your second forward.
Yeah, my second forward is David Clarke.
David Clarke. I mean, what can you say about David Clarke? 14 seasons as a Panther. His first season was way back in 2003, 2004, with his last one coming in 2017, 2018. He did spend a year in Italy in 2007, 2008, but in total he played 605 games for the Panthers, scoring 295 goals, 277 assists, a total of 572 points. 1 league championship, 5 playoffs, 7 Challenge Cups, 1 Conference Cup, and 1 Continental Cup championship. I mean, I could go on, Jono. He's been inducted into the British Ice Hockey Hall of Fame. Obviously, his shirt has been retired, the number 5 shirt. But just tell us why David Clarke had to be on your top line.
In the era that I've been watching hockey, apart from the first few years, well, sort of when I started going regularly, when we only had 3 imports, it has been a pretty import heavily dominated scene. Even when the Elite League came in, there was more British players, but it's still dominated by imports. So I've always had a thing for British players, but I always think sometimes that there can be a bit of overhype with British players. You never got that with David Clarke. David Clarke was a brilliant player, an import quality forward, a sniper, someone who scored brilliant goals, scored regularly, was always towards the top of the point standings. He was massively important to the Nottingham Panthers. And to stay so many years and only leaving to try something different and to better himself in a better league, you couldn't ask for a better player or a better man to be in that Panthers side. Just an incredible servant to the club, and the amount of silverware that he was involved with just shows that. He has been part of the Panthers during our most brilliant years with regards to winning trophies, and he was, again, another player who was quite easy to slot into my side.
You mentioned import quality. With all due respect to British players, you can't say that about a lot of British players, can you?
No, you can't. There's a few. There's a few very good ones. I mean, you've only got to think of the likes of Robert Dowd, Ben O'Connor. I think Robert Lakovic in his earlier career certainly was as good as any import on the Panthers side. But David Clarke had that consistency season in, season out, where he was always towards the top of the points standings. He was as good and as worthy as any import player in that side. Just a great player.
You talk about consistency. I think one of the facts for me is, most goals by a British player in 6 seasons, and 4 of them were in consecutive from 2010 onwards. I mean, that just kind of explains in one fact the type of player we're talking about here.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, of course, this was a guy who was the overall top point scorer in the Elite League until Colin Shields took his record last season. So that just goes to show the amount of points that he scored. But I think the other thing as well, he was such a loyal servant. He kept coming back. He could probably have gone, and he probably could have gone to another club, certainly in his earlier years, and probably won a lot more trophies. But he stayed, he stuck it out, and the riches came to him as a Nottingham Panthers player. And they were totally and utterly deserved.
And I think for me, if you were looking for a club ambassador, then, David Clarke kind of fits that mould. And I think talking about the player, the one thing that I think just explains and shows the type of man he was and what he did for the Panthers and what he gave to the Panthers was that night in Belfast when we won the league. Because I remember we were there, obviously, Jono, but early in the first period, he had a fight. You look at the play and there was a bit of a scuffle along the boards, throw a hit. And it was more of kind of forcing the Belfast player into having a fight to kind of say to his team, come on, we can do this. Let's get our game faces on and let's go out there and do this and complete the job. But then he came up with a massive goal to reply. And it just signalled to me the type of player that he was, and the determination and the will to get over the line to get that elusive trophy.
Oh, he was fired up that night. I mean,
dodgy tash, dodgy tash on the night, but yeah, fired up.
You very rarely saw David Clark fight.
Yeah, exactly. He weren't the
needed,
greatest of fights, John. I'm not going to lie. We've seen better.
But when he needed to,
he did the job.
He did everything for his club. He played for the badge on the front. He certainly didn't play for the name on the back. For him, it was all about the team. So you wouldn't expect anything else from him in that sort of game.
Do you think, just finally on David Clark, we'll ever see another player similar to the ilk of Clarkey?
I think we will. I'm lucky enough to cover a lot of junior hockey, and there's a deep talent pool. It's just whether any of those can be brought through and nurtured to consistently play at that level. But there's certainly a lot of potential there. So yes, I think we could.
Good. And we're also talking about a player that did very well for his country as well. So David Clark becomes your second forward. So let's complete your top line, Jono, with your third forward.
My third and final forward is Jordan Fox.
Jordan Fox, yes, 2 seasons as a Panther in 2011-12 and 2012-13. A total of 135 games played, 46 goals, 112 assists for a total of 158 points, coming in at 1.17 points per game. He had ECHL experience, but he was a league championship winner with the Panthers. He won 2 Challenge Cups, 2 playoff championships, and of course he was the Grand Slam winning captain. I mean, when you kind of hear those facts, Jono, and you only hear that he's played 2 seasons as a Panther, that is a pretty special 2 seasons. So why did you choose Jordan Fox?
2 words: inspirational leader. He was a fantastic captain in that season that we won everything. He was brilliant. And also, the other thing you got to remember is that season he scored more than a point a game, and for the majority of it he played on defence because he went back to cover. But he still scored some incredible goals. You only have to remember that game against Sheffield where he danced through everybody, went round DeCaro and slotted it in. I think John DeCaro is still pulling his pants up from that goal so many years later. But in all seriousness, he had everything. He was a fantastic all-round player, shown by the fact that he could go back and play on the blue line, but still be a massive offensive threat despite that. Also, I remember the game against Edinburgh where we lost 2-1 at home in that championship season, and his interview afterwards.
Midweek.
He basically went, "This is on me. This is my fault. I take responsibility for it. I am the captain. This won't happen again." And it didn't. That was a true leader taking responsibility for his team. And he was just a great player. And there was so much disappointment when he left. But I think what was left for him to do in Britain, he won it all, was his challenge elsewhere after that. I'd love to have kept him. I'd love to have kept him for another season. But we always have that season. And he was a massive part and a huge reason why we won it all that season.
Johnny talks about that interview after the Edinburgh game, and I think if anybody kind of hasn't seen that and knows obviously about Panthers winning the league that year, that is such a pivotal moment in that season that if you can Google that or go on YouTube and find that, it all becomes clear, I think, when you watch that interview again, of how the season started. And obviously, we talked earlier on about Lepine not being with the team at the beginning of the season, but that was such a pivotal moment because, with all due respect, we shouldn't have been losing to Edinburgh in our barn, whatever night. It just shouldn't happen. And I think any Panthers fan that was watching that year, that game is so vivid because it was just not good enough. So I think, like you say, the inspirational captain, but watch that interview because I think that just shows you the pillar of the man and what he brought to the team. Let's not forget he had sort of family ties to Nottingham to a certain degree, obviously through Brock Wilson and then obviously Wink. But to have that impact as well as an import on a club for just that short amount of time, I think is quite spectacular.
That first season he played with Brock Wilson, his cousin, his grandfather Wink was an original era Panther, so he had that family connection. So I think that gave him a bit of pride towards the club before he even played for us. Let's not forget, he was a great player. He was incredibly skillful. He created goals or moves out of nothing. He was just an absolute inspiration. He was a fabulous, fabulous player, and one who I think up until Sam Hare came in, we haven't had a captain who's really got close to that.
No, and I think just finally on Jordan Fox, I think it's quite fitting that really his last act as a Panther was to score the game-winning goal in the playoff final against Belfast to complete the Grand Slam. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
Not every player can say they did that.
No, and he did, and what a way to sign out! What a way to sign out!
Exactly, and I remember Paul Thompson on commentary just going, something like, what a man, what a player, what a hockey person, you know, and I think that kind of says everything about Jordan Fox. So he has completed your forward line and he's also completed your top line, Jono. But as you've said previously, you've had some tough decisions. So there must have been some people that were close to making your top line. So is there any honourable mentions that you would like to say, or what kind of players nearly got in there?
There's quite a few. Obviously, the four mentioned from my favourite goal, David Alexander Beauregard, was definitely a consideration, a player I admired hugely. PC Druin, who for the first 2 seasons that the Panthers were in the NIC was outstanding, one of the best players I've seen, so skillful. But even when he played for Bracknell the 2 seasons previously, he stood out. A great player. Players that have been picked before on other teams, so Terry Kurtenbach and Jimmy Pack were two I certainly considered for the defence. David Ling, of course, who was, again, another one who was such a massive factor in us winning the Grand Slam in the 12-13 season. Danny Myers, of course, the most successful captain in Panthers history, and also a really good quality British defenseman as well, was a consideration. And Nigel Rhodes, who played for the Panthers when I really first started going regularly, a British player, a British forward, and the first one I sort of really took a note of. So he was certainly considered. But I come down to 3 who were very, very close to getting in. So first is Matthew Myers, but I couldn't really find a spot for him. But Matthew Myers was massively important to us in the seasons that he played for us, and I think it says a lot about him that when he came back in the 2015-16 season, we won the Challenge Cup and the playoffs. Yeah, and look at the trophies he's won in Cardiff as well. I think I hate the word, but the most winningest player in the Elite League history. I think he is the guy with the most time. Yeah. Paul Adey, an absolute Panthers legend, our top point scorer, an incredibly consistent player every season, always towards the top of the point standings. Transgressed 2 eras as well by starting for Panthers when they were playing in the British League, and then was still a top player when we went to the import-laden Super League. He was still on top of the scoring charts every single season. Yeah, he was incredibly close. It was, to be honest, it was between him and Jordan Fox for that last spot. And I did go with Jordan Fox. But Paul Adey was very close to getting in there. And, of course, a guy who I've been lucky enough to work with in his career as a pundit and mine as a commentator. So a great guy, a really, really top guy. And then the final one, which may surprise a few, is actually Mika Wietman. I think I was always going to go with Craig Kowalski, but Mika Wietman was definitely a consideration. And the reason being that the reason we won the Continental Cup, the reason we won the Challenge Cup, the reason we won the playoffs in 2016 was mainly down to Mika Wietman. His goals against averages in those tournaments was astonishing. In the Continental Cup, he was over 95%. And people can say, yeah, but look at the standard of opposition. Doesn't matter. We played 3 rounds away from home and ended up winning the Continental Cup, and no small part down to his performances in the net. But also, I think the thing with Mika Wietman is that he had an incredibly tough act to follow in Craig Kowalski. Huge skates to fill. And I think he managed it. Overall, not as good as Kowalski. I think anybody would know that. But for 2 seasons, he was very, very good for us, and a big reason why we won 3 trophies in these 2 seasons with us. So they are all my honourable mentions.
You could make another team out of them, couldn't you, really?
Pretty much, yeah.
It's not a bad team, that. But just finally, as we come to the end of this podcast, many years as a Panthers fan, as you've discussed already, your great aunt and uncle got you involved in it and got your passion for the Panthers enlightened all the way back in 1980. It's many years ago.
Yeah, I owe them a lot. I owe them an awful.
I mean, it's a lovely story, that is, to be fair, to kind of just highlight how you got into the sport and a sport that you say has had many ups and downs, but also is quite personal to you, regarding your work and how you live your life now. Many ups and downs, as I say, but out of everything that you've watched, everything you've been involved in with the Panthers, what would you say is your favourite moment?
Well, I've got 2. And I'm sort of borrowing,
breaking the rules.
Yeah, I'm borrowing from Steph a bit here. I've got a secondary one, and then I've got my main one. So
start off with your secondary one.
My secondary one is Brian McGrattan's goal against Sheffield in that playoff quarter-final. Now, we all know how that ended up, and we didn't make the finals weekend.
No, and we would have seen that goal, in the very recent time, because Panthers replayed that game just a few days before we record this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is 60 seconds, 70 seconds of just perfection. It is incredible. It's an incredible passage of play. Just everything that happens before it, everything that goes off the puck. And then he has the foresight to just jump into the play, take the puck, take it round Mustakovs and into the net. Bedlam. And it's just an incredible passage of play. Just phenomenal. And yeah, it wasn't the ending we wanted, but you just take that in isolation. It's so far-fetched, it's ridiculous.
And I think special, isn't it?
I know Andy picked this, I think, as his favourite moment or favourite goal in his top line. And he was right in what he said. He says, Hollywood would look at that and they'd just reject it for being too far-fetched. It was a Hollywood moment because it was just so ridiculous. It was wonderful.
I mean, you're talking about a guy that, just NHL royalty, but, just a big name in the NHL, comes over to Nottingham to play in the little old, elite league, comes here with a tinted visor. And, I mean, even now, the thing that makes me laugh is he still chirps the Steelers fans and the Steelers as a club, even to this day. And I think when you talk about that goal and that moment and this is what I think a lot of Steelers fans were just maybe part of his wind-up, I don't know, but he skated straight down to, obviously, the away section to celebrate in front of them.
Yeah, they didn't like that.
Yeah. Go on then, what's your favourite moment?
My favourite moment, this stems from being a fan for a long time. As I say, I went to my first game in 1980 in the old Nottingham Ice Stadium. My favourite moments was walking in to Hamburg and Zurich to watch my team play in the Champions Hockey League. Because as someone who saw us play in the old rink and saw us play in the British League and then Super League and then the early years of the Elite League and all the trials and tribulations that we'd gone through as a club, to actually stand there and see us in the top European competition competing against a DEL team and a Swiss team, the likes of Zurich, whose players are probably single players are paid many more times than their entire squad, just filled me with so much pride. And to think that we was there in a competitive game against the giants of the European game, a humble little club, it was just something incredibly special and something that I will never, ever forget.
And I think, obviously the first British team to compete in the CHL. I mean, I was very lucky enough to be there in Hamburg, as were you, as you've discussed. And I think it's that moment, isn't it, where you walk into their arenas and you have a bit of a wow moment. Some people might have been to an NHL game, they might have gone to a game in the DEL, but as you say, to watch your old little club actually compete, and when they come out for warm-up and you've got hundreds of Panthers fans singing, and I think that night we didn't stop singing all game, and the result was the result. But just as an experience, as you say, it's just something that is just will all forever be etched in Panthers history and your history as a Panthers fan.
Oh, absolutely. It was amazing. And just to stand there and watch my team playing on the same arena, the same ice as these top European teams. It was just an immense sense of pride. I've seen us play games where we've won by huge margins, and I've seen us play in a ramshackle but beautifully loved and much missed rink. And to just stand there and see, even 10 years, 15 years ago, if someone had told me that, I'd have just laughed at them. But to actually be there and to experience it, it was just a feeling of immense pride.
There we have it, Jono. Your top line, let's just recap. Craig Kowalski, Roy Mitchell and Guillaume Lepine on defence. Your forwards are Simon Hunt, David Clark and Jordan Fox. Just finally, Jono, as a top line, your views on the selections that you've made and the team that you've chosen.
Incredibly solid in netminding and defence. Bit of muscle with Hunty, scoring ability with Fox and Clark. Yeah, I think they cause a few problems.
Well, Jono, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you and going through your players and your selections. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolute pleasure, mate. Thanks ever so much.
So there we have it, the latest edition of My Top Line. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to Jono, as I say, but thank you very much for listening. There will be another Top Line in the near future, but for the time being, stay safe and thank you very much for listening, and we will speak to you very, very soon.